Cool. Thank you very much for coming to this session. I completely understand if you need to have a snooze. This is normally my nap time, so I will try not to nap. But yeah, as long as you don't snore, that'd be awesome. Okay, intro. Same slide as the last one, if anyone was at that last session I did. So I'm Cathy Knowsley, for over 25 years in the industry, doing various things. A lot of my time has been touring with a small theatre company, Indian Ink Theatre, all around the world, which has been a real privilege. And I do event management stuff, site management mostly for events, and it's from that I decided to get a diploma in health and safety management. At the time I didn't realise that the law was about to change. It was like perfect timing. So I've been very busy ever since. I've got my own company, High-Vis Event Management, and I'm HASANZ registered, which is like being a master builder in the health and safety consultancy world. Need a battery change. Did you do that or did I? Sweet. Oops, there we go. Legal duty to manage risk. So I'll just briefly go over risk management in general. Basically, the point of today's session was that we often focus on the risk assessment side of things when we're doing risk management, and then we kind of get this gorgeous looking document and then kind of don't do anything with it. So it's really focusing on the back end of all of that and what the requirements that you have, hence the 202 tagline. So, but just to recap, in terms of risks, you have a duty, PCBUs, the companies, your organisations, whoever's in charge, has a duty to eliminate risks if you can possibly eliminate them. And if it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate the risks, then you need to minimise them. Now, reasonably practicable is that term that means that if you weigh up the likelihood of the event occurring and the consequences, and then you need to look at what things you ought to know about and what things are available to manage the risk, and then use those if you can. Cost comes into it, but only if the cost is grossly disproportionate to the level of the risk. So reasonably practicable means, that well, it's just like, what's another good term for it? What is possible, really, I suppose, in a general term. Recapping risk management. So this is a model for risk management, and basically this sort of outlines how you would go through the process of managing risks. So the first thing would be establishing context, and then you see in the blue area that's the risk assessment part that we all are pretty good at by now, or most companies have somebody that they hand that off to that does it. It's the bit at the bottom, the treating the risk, and beyond that I'm sort of focusing on today. Establishing the context, it's who are you, what do you do, what risks do you have, who are your stakeholders, who are you reporting to? If you're a company, if you work for an AV company, you might be reporting to a director or two directors. If you're a arts festival, you might be reporting to a general manager who then reports to a board. So what's the situation and why are you managing the risks is what the context is about. And that sets the tone as to what level that you need to take your risk assessment to. There is no legal requirement to do risk assessments in a certain way. You don't have to come up with numbers and letters and all of that sort of stuff. The legal requirement is that you identify your risks and you manage them. If you're reporting to a board or you're reporting to somebody higher up, then you're likely to need to have some means of telling them what your risks are and how risky they are, and that's why you would do the risk assessment. The next step on that little charty thing was identifying the risks, and it's important not to confuse hazards with risks. So I think we summed it up yesterday in the session I was doing is risks are kind of hazards is when you add people to hazards, really. So a hazard is anything that, including a person's behaviour, that's an actual or potential source of harm or damage. A risk is exposure to that hazard. So that's the difference between risks and hazards. So you can quite happily have the speaker sitting there by itself, minding its own business. It could be a hazard, and if there's an earthquake, it might fall over onto you. But by itself, it's fine. It's only if I stand next to it and there's an earthquake that it then becomes the risk, that kind of thing. Often you'll see something like this if you're doing your analysing of the risks, and you've probably seen these sorts of charts before. There is no one good way of doing this. You can make up whatever you like in that, but it's a way for you to identify how likely something is to happen and what the consequences are if it does happen. So generally we will give something a rating, a risk rating, and the risk rating will be likelihood and consequences. And then you would, after you've done that, you would check it out. So if it's possible that something minor can happen, then that will, you use the matrix. So is everyone familiar with this sort of stuff? I'm just sort of brushing over it really quickly. It's the sort of thing you'll do. These grids, again, you decide which one you like to use. I don't like using numbers. It rates things generally that are insignificant, the same as things that are severe, with a number system, but some people prefer numbers. That's fine as well. The next bit's the bit that a lot of people skip, but I think is really important, is what do you do with that information once you've got it? So if you are rating something as critical, it's up to you as an organisation to come up with why. Why is, or what's important about that? So you come up with your nice little, you get your grid and you say something's likely to happen, it's possible that it'll happen, and the consequences could be death, so we rate that as critical. Then what? So what? By looking at a rating chart like this, you decide in advance what the steps are going to be that you take to manage the risks. So if, for instance, this is just an example, if something's critical, then in my mind it's unacceptable for this organisation, this mystery organisation. I've left a gap there, somebody must be informed. It's usually the general manager must be informed. To add to that, work, if it's happening right there and then, work must stop. If something's up there in the critical line, looking back there, then it's likely or highly likely that somebody could die. You just do not proceed. You stop. You sort it out. Nothing should happen that remains at critical. With that. Sorry. And then going through the chart, it outlines at what level. So by the time we get down to low, we kind of go, well, actually, we can accept that as a risk. It's fine. We've got general routine things that we do. A cable across the floor comes in at low. We already all know that we tape down cables. It's a routine thing that we manage all the time. We don't have to report to the board that we're taping down cables. We do have to report to the board if somebody could die. So it's identifying what process is going to happen with the information that you have about the risks. The important thing about that is that, and the reason you would need to report up to your manager or up to the board, is that they're the ones who are ultimately personally liable with the new laws. So they can be charged independent of the company. They can be charged as individuals if they knew that something was dangerous and an incident happened. So it's in a way, a lot of people say health and safety, this is just arse covering, but I think if you're in that position, you would want a degree of that to be happening. Oops. It is being really temperamental. There we go. So as I said, we'll focus on treating the risk today. Treating the risk controls. Controls are the actions that you're going to take to manage a risk. And it's really important. I don't know, how many of you have seen this, the hierarchy of control with managing risks? So a few of you have. Okay, so this is the bit that I brushed over the other stuff quite briefly, but this is the bit that really sort of going to hone in on today. It's very important with managing risks, if possible, as it said in the early slide. If you can, you need to eliminate them. That's the one in the green. That's level 1. If it's possible to get rid of whatever it is that could cause harm, then go ahead and get rid of it. That's the first step. And if it's not practicable to do that, then you need to minimise, and that's all the bits in blue. Now, there's an order in which it's good to consider the minimising of things, and I've put them there in terms of level 2, level 3, level 4. The first step is that you substitute it with something, substitute it, isolate it, or engineering controls. These are the top level controls to manage risks. They are the most effective. And they're also the things, if you look at the arrow on the right-hand side, you'll see they're the things that are less susceptible to human error or human choice. We choose those ones when we come up with a risk rating that's critical or high, because they are the most effective ways of managing risks. There's also a thing around this hierarchy of control that some of the regulations that are in place around certain particular risks, you must consider them looking at the hierarchy of control. That's a legal requirement. For all other risks, this is more of a choice thing. But the best way to consider it is to consider those higher level controls first. Substitution, find something safer. Okay, so if you're up and down ladders all the time, ladders inherently aren't particularly safe. So you might want to look at getting a scissor lift in or something like that. It's replacing it with something that is potentially safer. You then need to risk assess the scissor lift and see if there's any risks associated with that you need to manage as well. But substitution is the top level. Isolation is locking something off. Blocking it off, physically blocking it off. So cones and cone barriers isn't isolating something. That's a visual control. It doesn't actually physically prevent somebody from entering a space. So an isolation would be putting up fences, it would be locking doors, it would be having controlled access to certain areas of your venue. So if you identify that having people up in the grid of your venue is a real risk, then you might have a card swipe system that only certain people have access to that. You lock it down, you're actually physically isolating it. You're putting a physical barrier up that prevents a person from coming in contact with a hazard, or prevents a hazard from coming in contact with a person. Engineering controls, and I always use the same example, it's your micro switches on your genie legs that mean that if it's not stable, it won't go up. It's an engineering control that's in place. The lift at Town Hall doesn't really exist as a venue anymore, but you might get the pit lift or something like that, the lift won't work unless you've got the barriers in and they're connecting the micro switches. That's an engineering control. It's something that's been engineered into the design that prevents people coming in contact with the harm. Okay, the important thing is that the personal part of that has been taken out of it. You don't decide whether or not that works. It just does work. There are things in place to prevent you from doing that, from becoming to harm. The next level down is something that you consider if risks are still remaining after you've thought about it, after you've gone, can I engineeringly put something there? There's a few things. We did a workshop yesterday on risk management, and one of the things that came up is a lack of kick rail on a catwalk. You know, it's very easy to drop something and it just to roll off, or for you to accidentally kick it off or whatever. So to install a kick rail, that's an engineering control. It stops things that have fallen from accidentally, things that you've dropped from accidentally falling from height. There may still be risk remaining with the things, and that's when you bring in the administrative controls. So that's when you have things like briefings, training people, they're at a lower level because people can actually make a decision. You may brief them 5 times, but come midnight and you're not there, they're still going to take the shortcut because they want to get home. So they're very vulnerable and susceptible to human error or poor decision making. Sorry, excuse me. But those sorts of things are quite handy to have. So if you put up a fence, you also put up a sign saying keep out. It's things that you add, you know. You put up the fence and then you re-risk assess and you go, well, people might not realise and they might climb the fence. So they're things that you can add in there. You can also add, you know, the training, the briefings, add to the engineering stuff. And then if risk still remains, that's when you bring in your personal protective equipment. That's when you bring in your hard hats, your high-vis vests, your boots, that sort of thing. It's for residual risk only. It shouldn't be the thing that stands between you and a critical incident occurring. And then finally is the bit that I've added onto this. It's not officially part of the hierarchy of control, but it's the emergency preparedness aspect of things. So if you've added your personal protective equipment, you've then got to have your rescue plan in place, and you've got to have your exits clear. So when stuff does happen, which accidents can still happen, you've got a first aid kit that's suitable for the injuries that you've got a clear path to the emergency egress. Those sorts of things come into play. Is there any questions at this stage about any of this? It's all... Okay. The reason why I chose this sort of topic is because time and time again I go into venues and I see people hitting things with personal protective equipment and not the upper level. And they're critical risks. They're risks that if something were to go wrong, somebody could die. And the main one I'm talking about with this is falling objects. And I'm going to touch on that in a little moment. If you came last time, you probably saw this, but it's one of my favourites. That's an administrative control. There's nothing stopping you walking past the signage that says keep out. 9 times out of 10, you don't see signs. I don't read signs. And especially if the sign's been there for an awfully long time. I mean, how many times on the motorway do you drive through that bit of road that somebody's left the 30k roadworks sign up? There's no roadworks. And on the 3rd time you go, there's no roadworks, I'm just going to drive through at 100. I'm ignoring the sign because I'm choosing to. Whereas if you were to put barriers up and make me slow down, I would. That would be an engineering control. So choosing your controls. So you've got this lovely, lovely risk assessment, you know what your risks are, and then you've got to actually come up with the controls to manage the risks. And obviously you've got your own knowledge. You know, you've been in, many of you, looking around the room, have been in the industry for an awfully long time. You've probably seen a lot of things go wrong and you've learned a lot, the hard way or the easy way, or you've observed stuff. So that's one of your best things. But I do caution you with using your own knowledge that you're not just grabbing what we've always done as the answer and not questioning whether or not there is actually a better control for things. If we have always just grabbed hard hats, thank you. He saw me struggling. Good bloke. Then that might be something that you will always go to as your number one go-to to fix the problem, but it might not be the best, most efficient. So I challenge you with your own knowledge stuff is to, if it's still coming in as an administrative control or coming in as a PPE, go, is there a better way? Is there another way we can address this problem? Again, particularly for the things that can, what I like to call maim or kill. Consultation with others using your internal resources. So if any of you are here and you're kind of more on the management side of things in a venue, then your workforce will have the answers. They will know stuff. There's the ETNZ guide, there's WorkSafe website, it's full of amazing information. There's Australian and New Zealand standards, and then we get to the regulations. Effective controls. What makes a control effective? Well, it's relevant to the risks. So if the risks are quite low, if there's not, all you're going to do is stub your toe, then you don't need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on some engineering thing around it. However, if somebody could die, then yes, you do have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on it. So relevant to the level of the risk, that they're actually effective, that you choose something to manage the risks that's effective, that will actually do the job that you're asking of it. And practical, obviously. That you can actually do it in the timeframes that you've got. We work in an industry that we're not setting up for months on end. We're not like a construction industry who has a site going for months, if not years. We're in and out very quickly. So obviously you need to choose a solution that's easy and practical for your people to be able to apply. And that falls into the realistic as well. And most importantly is that it's safe, that you don't swap out with something that's actually more dangerous than your initial risk. So whatever you choose needs to, you need to reassess it, make sure that you're not creating more risks. It's all in the way you hold your mouth. I'll reiterate the hierarchy of control. Now, touch on regulations. There are certain regulations that exist, and there are others to do with electrical safety and that kind of thing as well. But these are the ones that I've sort of dragged out that I think are relatively relevant to our industry. And these are the... it's an interesting thing, the regulations, when they redid the law in 2015 or whenever it was, and then in 2016 they came out with some more regulations. But for some reason they kind of only half redid the regulations, and then you're still referring back to regulations from 1995 as well. So there's a bit of a hodgepodge of ones that are written with the new language and ones that are written with the old language. And it is actually relatively confusing. But there are regulations around working at heights of more than 3 metres, there's regulations around falling objects, there's regulations around raised objects, and all these other ones, noise. When there's a regulation, they have a prescribed set of conditions that you must meet in managing them. So every other risk that you have out there that doesn't fall into these regulations, all you have to do is manage it as best that you can. When there's a regulation involved, they will have some extra bits that you have to consider, that you must consider when you're dealing with those particular risks. So that's a bunch of them. Loose bud and closed-in materials always fascinates me. I'm just imagining like an orchestra pit full of foam or something like that, but it could happen. Hazardous substances has their own particular lot of regulations, and that's a whole talk in and of itself, which I won't be doing.
Are they all on the website?
Yeah, they are. They are all on the website. Although, funnily enough, if you do look them up, they don't tend to refer to the older regulations. I don't know why they just couldn't just go through and update them all at once. So there's a lot of confusing stuff around the law. I'll put my hand up and be completely honest, even working in health and safety land, I thought that the new ones replaced the old ones, no question. So I was going around going, oh, wow, they don't have the thing about working at heights anymore. Interesting, wonder why they took that out. And it wasn't till some time that somebody said, no, those other regulations are still in force unless they've been revoked. And so you kind of have to actually go fossicking and to find them, which I think is stupid for the layperson, but obviously it works for lawyers because they're the ones that write the laws. Any questions? Questions? All right. So with the new laws, the new regulations, there's a bunch of, within this regulation, regulations 5 to 8 relate to particular hazards. That's how they describe it, it's particular hazards. And then later on in the regulations, they go and list what these particular hazards are. So if you come across one of these particular hazards, and I'll give you an example, the falling objects is one of them. Also remote working, and I think duty for young people all come under the new regulations. Your duty is that you must identify the hazards associated with that particular situation. You must follow the hierarchy of control. So you must consider those engineering, those isolating, those, what was the other one? Substituting first. You have to. And then go to the lower levels. You have a duty to maintain those controls. So once you've chosen them, you need to make sure that they're being applied. You must make sure that they're actually fit for purpose. So you might decide, okay, the way I'm going to control not falling off the catwalk is I'm going to tie a piece of string to myself into the handrail. It's not fit for purpose, it's not suitable for the nature and duration of the work, and it's probably not installed correctly. So those things you have to do. You know, you must make sure that whatever it is that you're choosing will actually work. And then you've got a duty to review it after a certain period of time. Whilst you're using it, you can go, look, that's actually not working. We need to amend it and make sure that it does work. So those are the 4 main duties that you have that it gets referred to later on. Any questions around those? What basically that is best practice, really. And for these significant risks where people can have serious harm, they've outlaid that as the law. But for the other risks, that's actually just the best practice, to do all of that stuff anyway. Coming back to this again. So you must do the stuff at the higher level. I've said it 3 times, it's going to sink in. Right, falling objects. So that's really, really wordy, and I don't really expect you to read it all, and I'm not going to read it out. But basically, it is saying that that if you have an object that is reasonably likely to fall on or injure a person, it's pretty jolly common in our industry. Okay, we're rigging, constantly rigging stuff above other people. So if it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate the risks, okay, and remembering regulations 5 to 8 was that order that I just mentioned before, you must do the hierarchy of control for this one. Okay, so if it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate, you must minimise, and you must do it by preventing the object from falling freely if it's practicable to do so. So, probably throw it open to the floor now. We're rigging a light in the theatre here yesterday from the catwalk, and there are people working below. What measures could we put in place, thinking of that top level, to prevent the object from falling freely? Anyone? Safety chain, okay. Okay, so let's focus on the falling freely. So safety chain, that'll work once you've got it in there and once you've got it rigged? Definitely. What about while you're rigging it? Yep. Yeah, cool. And that's actually got a catwalk. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely you do want to be in a stable position. But what's to stop that falling freely if it slips out of your hand?
Put a piece of rope on it, tie it off to rig it with enough slack.
That's probably number 2. That's probably B. I think you go out there, go right out there. We're not going reasonable, we're not going we're not going what you're actually going to do, but what sort of things could be in place?
Net below the grid?
Yeah, net below the grid, yeah. It's that kind of level that they're talking about with this. So if you think building sites, and if you look at any of the big buildings around town, they've got the whole big bits of ply things nowadays to stop your spanner from, if you drop it, that it's not going to fall freely. Actually, that might be lower down as well. But it's that thing that will stop it from falling freely. So it's a measure preventing it from falling freely. And then it's a system to arrest the fall. And that would be your rope, your ladder, your ladder. Where did ladder come from? Your rope, your safety chain, and that sort of thing. Okay. And then third on the list, if it's not reasonably practical to comply with either of those other two. So you can't put anything in place because that's crazy. Although if you're in the venue, it might be something you might like to look at. There are venues where you do have those safety nets or what have you. But if it's not practicable, then providing an exclusion zone that persons are prohibited from entering. So what do?
We hard hats.
We make people wear hard hats. That's a really good way of doing it. And that's probably actually comes up to, that's right up there in the substitution level. And that's a great way of doing it. So, if you were to go into, the St James Theatre here, there's nobody there because they're it's a construction site, so that's not a good example. The Opera House here, and you got on your ladders and you went up and you put your lights up. Well, obviously the most practical thing to do is lower the lighting bars in and rig it that way. And that's a way that we as an industry have dealt with that. That's a way safer way of doing it. And so that's an engineering control. So that's one thing. But if we are going up, if we are on a catwalk, if we are doing that, what do we do as an industry? Are we meeting any of those criteria? That's the law. The law says you must do that, those things. And what do? We give them a hard hat.
or better, you have an exclusion zone length, so if space underneath is excluded, you don't need a hard hat if you're not there.
Exactly. So in most cases, if we were to go into your average venue, and I'm not talking about a venue like this where it's relatively low and it's it's still going to hurt if you drop a light on somebody. If you hit them in the wrong place, you'll probably kill them. But I'm talking in the main theatre space out there. We can't stop it from falling freely. We can once we've rigged it. Be careful about it, and we can minimise the time that we have it loose. It might be that we don't walk around the catwalk with things. We haul them up on a line so that they are always attached. That kind of thing can happen. It may or may not be practicable to do that with the timeframes and everything you have. Okay, but essentially we can do number 3. We can make an exclusion zone.
And most of us are in the theatre industry,
Yep.
been involved in it. So what's the story around loading a counterweight system? Are we supposed to have an exclusion zone down the bottom?
If something could fall freely.
Well, if you're loading a cradle with weights, you've got the human area where people can drop a cradle,
Yep.
drop a weight.
So what are the risks? The risks are that you're loading it onto the cradle, and it slips and it falls down. So who can get hurt?
Well, most of us who work in theatre, it can bounce off and it can bounce quite a way off any of the rigging that's down below anywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
You would have, generally you've got a flyman working down below you.
Yep. So then, is there a way to create a form of an isolation?
You can put some pencils in there, absolutely.
You'd have to make sure that your flyman was away from the rail while you were loading.
Yeah.
But you can isolate it, but you can put pencil grip.
Right the way down the whole side of the building.
Potentially. Yeah. That would be something that would come into the design of your actual fly system, obviously. But if it's something that happens at the bottom, if it falls down and can bounce out or whatever, Can it fall to a point that it doesn't hit anyone? Is there a way that you can put a barrier in place that prevents the person at the bottom from getting their body in the way of the falling object?
I mean, most canaway systems I've seen around the country, they're all open, and when a canaway falls, it can bounce off anything on the way down. It can bounce off another cradle, it can bounce off any of the rails or any of the structure that's holding the whole system in place.
Then it's a real risk, and it's something that needs to be addressed. So yeah, I am saying that this covers that. It's not what you want to hear. I'm not and I'm sorry, I didn't write the law. But it is something that you need to consider, and you need to consider how you minimise that risk. And whether that is, whilst the cradles are being loaded, that it doesn't happen when you've got a lot of people in there. That the person at the bottom is in direct communication with the person at the top. It's very rare, I think, in our industry that we can have the floor completely clear when we're rigging above. You generally have somebody on the bottom who's directing stuff, who's on the end of the hauling line or whatever. But what does my head in is when I see people from other departments walking in there. What does my head in is when I see the person from the marketing department of the venue taking a tour through there. Catering coming through there. Yeah, because they're not directly working with you. Now, if I'm on the end of a hauling line and you're upstairs and we're communicating directly, you can tell me heads. It may or may not save my life, but if I'm busy on the floor taping cables for the sound department, because the sound department never tape their own cables, I'm not talking to you, I'm not even aware of what you're doing, and you yell out heads, the chances of me leaping in the right direction is, you can minimise those risks. So it's providing the exclusion zone. It's not letting people rig over the top of each other. And it's a real culture shift because we've always done it. And I'm kind of sort of throwing down the gauntlet to the industry. It's like, we shouldn't be doing this. We are really lucky nobody's been killed from this. Probably it's a statistical thing. There's quite a lot of big stage and there's and how many of you have had near misses with that? Yeah. I've had Shackle fall from the grid in the ASB theatre, and it was within a metre. Somebody was up there. It was back in the day. Didn't even have a hard hat. We didn't need them then. Also, ironically, had a vacuum cleaner tube. They're doing maintenance and somebody was vacuuming the floor and this vacuum cleaner tube came down, which would have been ironic because if you've ever flattered with me, you know that I'm not really into vacuuming. Yeah. Everyone will go, really, Cathy? No. She never touched a vacuum cleaner. So with the exclusion zone, what do you think would be required of that? And then we have to risk assess and assess the hazards.
That's called a man trap.
Because when they're talking exclusion zones, they're meaning physical barriers preventing people. They're not meaning cones and cone barriers. They're certainly not meaning cones by themselves. Or a circular flight cases, because all of those can be breached by anybody at any time. So cones and cone barriers is better than nothing, but you have to make very certain that whoever else is in there doesn't walk through that area. And I don't know, in my experience, it's really hard to be in the roof and stay within the cones and cone barrier area because you're carrying your light from the other end of the grid to get to there. The best thing is to schedule it so that nobody's working over the top of anyone else, except the people that vitally have to be there.
Venues can't handle it, client can't handle it, so they don't want to pay the money for the venue. And it balances along. What's reasonably practical?
Reasonably practicable. This is a law, this is a regulation. You have to follow this regulation. There's not the reasonably practicable bit of that. If you can't do A, B, or B, you have to do C.
It's going to be only reasonably practical to increase rates and higher, really, to be able to get up to some of the levels that are being demanded.
Yeah, like putting extra resources on
Well, yeah,
to cope with
yeah.
it.
Whether it's having extra staff on, as you say, being open for an extra few hours, it is.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Or just some decent scheduling, actually. You know, like, you know, you might need the venue for a little bit longer, but going in and getting your points in well before anyone else comes in on board. And locking all the doors so that the marketing department can't bring anyone through. Educating those people that when this is happening, when these flags are up, when this barrier's across the door, it's a physical barrier. I don't know, we've got a venue, we've got a little concertina little thing that goes across, like you have on the front of the stage. It says you are not allowed here. You are not allowed on the stage, or if you're in an arena venue, you are not allowed in the room at all because we have people in the roof. And then they whip around and do it all. You're not moving your barriers. You can do it. You can do half a room if you're doing a big place like the TSB. You can do that kind of thing, definitely. But the chances of somebody wandering through into that, and I mean, I fear that it's going to take a fatality to change this, and then we're all going to go, oh my God, and then we'll change it, and we'll go, oh, we've always done it like this. Let's do it before we have the fatality. Yeah.
It's a bit of a delicate one with locking doors and stuff though, because then you're starting to destroy your evacuation plans in the...
There's no one in there to evacuate.
Well, if you're in there doing it, then you're in there.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's true. That is...
I work for the council, so I get a lot of building officers and coming through and checking I'm a technician to be on passport. And sometimes it's quite difficult to balance the different aspects of health and safety and make them all work together, you know. It's like, you might want to isolate a room, but then you can't lock the door because then you've stopped the fire escape and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with venues and that, you kind of need to look at it in the bigger picture. You know, maybe you can lock a door that you have you can always get out, but it's locked from the outside, or those sorts of things. And it may not be a lock, it may just be something else, a physical barrier. If you're not going to do an actual physical barrier, then you need to, you know, have people there to maintain. You cannot come here.
It comes down to building design as well. Like our house is 120 years old, so there's not a lot of that stuff was being on the conscious, you know, back when it was built.
Sure.
So it's adapting the space to that technology.
It's also getting your the whole of your venue to be in agreement with this, and it needs to be led from the top down. You just have to go to the general manager and say, this is the regulations, this is what could happen, this is a critical risk, somebody could die, or it's certainly up in the high, we need to manage it. And then you get together with your team, your front of house manager, your marketing manager, or whoever's the person that keeps bringing the punters through when you're trying to do stuff. And you go, how are we going to manage this together? It's not just my problem, it's your problem as well. And
I think that's one of the big challenges in our industry is getting everyone who's on board to recognise the risk. And there is a lot of people who have been doing things the same way for so long and they've been safe in doing it. It doesn't necessarily mean that something bad's not going to happen, but they're so used to doing it the way and it's been safe for so long that they don't want to change.
Absolutely. And like, to be honest, I mean, I talk a lot about blind spots. I come from the industry, and I just don't see what's up with ladders. You know, I've climbed ladders all my life, safe as anything, but they're not. I just think they're safe because I've always used them. We think it's what we're doing with this. I don't know if we do think it's safe. We just think that, you know, do we? Do we think that it's safe to rig above people's heads? Probably not. But it's something we've always done. But it doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it.
We just would,
you can say it's better than what it used to be, but certainly the whole giving people hard hats. I mean, if I had my way, we would never have a hard hat on stage because we never would need it. And there are all sorts of arguments for hard hats. You've got your hard hat, for bump stuff as well on stages and that. But there should never be somebody rigging above, because if a shackle hits you from the grid height onto your hard hat, the damage that will do, is you'll end up munted. You may not be dead, but you may wish that you were. Certainly, and then if it lands on any other part of your body, or if you happen to be bending over and it gets you on the back of the neck, or you're looking up and a hard hat is not going to save you from that sort of injury.
We just put retractable barriers in that go so we can block our whole stage off. So all doors, all side of the stage, it seems like everything can be blocked off from the stage.
Where are you?
Napier.
Yep, cool.
Which we use just regularly, and we've just used we had a production in the Labour operatic for quite a few weeks. So even afterwards, you know how you all get the stage tours afterwards, so they had to do briefings with their stage manager before, health and safety briefing, before they were going to take the tour on stage.
Yeah, cool.
I was blocked off every night as soon as the performance finished.
Yeah. Definitely, if you've got punters involved, definitely physical barriers. Because they just aren't savvy. And it's not that they're stupid. I don't know what they do in their workplaces. I'd be completely lost if I was on an oil rig or whatever. They don't know our hazards, and they don't work in the dark like we do. And so any time that there's a member of the public or a visitor able to get access to any of those areas, you need to be able to isolate.
Because they're used to just having it all open and be able to take people out there all the time. So to get it through their stage team that they can't go out there after the production, and that they can't just take friends out there without a briefing first was a bit of a mind shift for them. But in the long run, it worked really well.
Yeah, and certainly that's the sort of thing that you can also put in place then if you do have that thing of other members of your team. And it's a visual thing too. It's a visual thing going, oh, the barrier's up, they must be working up there. A sign isn't going to cut it.
All the people in our venue know that if the barriers are up, they're not to go on the stage.
Yeah.
So
you've eliminated
it's one of those retractable ones like a seatbelt that goes out right across with the hazard lines right on it.
So that'll be a visual rather than actual physical. Yeah. But I mean, it's at least something, and you've got the culture that you don't do it. I mean, I think the thing with this is that a lot of it does come down to educating at all levels. And if you're a venue, that's that team. If you're a production manager or whatever, it's writing your schedule in a way that you're utilising your breaks, you stagger your crew starts or whatever, so that the points go in before the boxes get unloaded. Or the boxes get unloaded and pushed to the door, but not beyond the door until the points are in, or whatever. And certainly, I do see often that is done on the in, and on the out, it's a free-for-all. And that's, that nobody should be going in to take the points out or anything above anyone's head until the boxes are out the door and being loaded into the truck. Then you do that. Because if anything happens, you're going to be in serious shit. And I didn't put the penalties up there, but they're pretty steep for that. And we've lost a good person, and the tragedy of that, and it's sort of an accident waiting to happen, really. No other industry would do this. Construction, they're all very, very tight about it. And certainly, if you are going to be not doing any of that stuff, it all needs to be at that level that somebody's not making a dodgy decision on their own. So.
It's just really hard with venues that are being booked the next day. Schedule around that.
And maybe it's something we need to educate, venues and everyone about, and get creative and share advice and go, hey, listen, we have nailed this. What we do is we do this, we stagger it. These people take their lunch breaks different from that, and we've actually only in there for an extra hour or whatever.
It's not so bad as the out.
Yeah.
Because you have to do a turnaround.
And then someone's in it 9 minutes for
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get what
But
that's
it's not
about.
only, it's not only the out, it's the reset afterwards.
Yeah.
Where you might only be there by yourself, working by yourself afterwards.
You see,
Bet you quite a few people in the industry do that.
that's a hazard in its own right.
That's right.
Well, yeah, there's a whole thing on remote working that you might want to look up.
And it's
Yeah, and I mean there are things, but there are a lot of industries do remote working, and often it's because they're actually remotely up in the hills or whatever, but having personal alarms or making sure that anybody who is working by themselves in the venue at night always has their cell phone right on them, so if they do fall down and they've broken their leg, they can at least call for help, those sorts of things.
Yeah, there's usually have a security guard somewhere, so make contact with the security guard. If you
really?
Not in the regions.
crime and you'll need a security guard.
Yeah. Cool. Sorry to open this can of worms for you guys. I probably don't actually have the... the other one is working at heights over 3 metres. And this is one of the old regulations, and you can tell it's an old one because it talks about employer or an employee. But where it says employer, substitute that with PCBU, and where it says employee, substitute that with worker, and you're pretty much on track. So, and again, I've picked these two because I think they're probably things that we don't do particularly well. But it is a regulation that if a worker can fall more than 3 metres, and there is no magical thing about 3 metres, by the way. Anyone who's on my HOVA's Facebook will have seen me post about that recently. There's just been a decision come out about a worker who died down at Centrepoint. The waterfront with working with containers. They were doing, I think it was container repairs. On top of a container, it's 2.9 metres. Fell off, hit his head on the ground, died. And they were charged quite a considerable amount of money. Yeah. And it was under 3 metres. Everyone kind of goes, oh, well, if it's under 3 metres, we're good. No, you don't have to follow this regulation, but you still have to manage the risk. And there was a risk of this person falling because there was a lot of them working on containers that I do believe it was repairs. So no matter what height you're working at, you still need to manage the risks. But if it's over 3 metres, there are these particular things that you must do. So you must have a means to prevent the worker from falling. So if you're on a catwalk, you need to have, mid-rails, kick rails, those sorts of things that will prevent you from falling. And you have to have whatever you provide needs to be fit for purpose. So if you are in a place that doesn't have a mid-rail, because that's the lighting position, how many people have venues like that? What means do you have to prevent your worker from falling?
Lights on.
Restraint.
Yeah. Well, there's that, yeah.
Discussion we're going through at the moment.
Yeah.
How we manage that.
Yeah. So again, it's a sort of this is a regulation. You must have a means to do that. It's very tricky. You can't have a mid-rail and if it's your lighting position. If you came to my earlier session on design, it would be really cool if venues actually thought that through beforehand and didn't have that situation that you actually had a separate rail that you can put your lights on and really think it through properly. And some of them do. I know that the new ASB one and the waterfront one in Auckland, a lot of thought went into that kind of thing. But if you don't have that, then you need to have something there. And if that's fall protection, then make sure that you've got points that you can actually harness off onto. And then if you've got that, then you've got to train your people at working at heights, and then you've got to have a rescue plan, and you've got to have all of that stuff in place as well. So there's just one or two things that I think we're probably not doing where we're looking at those higher levels where we should, where somebody, if they actually fall off that catwalk, they will die. And we need to manage that with an engineering control. Whatever that may be. I don't necessarily have the answers, sorry. whether it's some sort of thing that is in place, a quick solution that's in place unless you're rigging in that particular bay, and then you take it out. Yep, whatever.
One of the conversations we've had is like, let's have some removable bars in that mid-rail section. So you have to remove that, put the light in, and eventually completely void it.
You can
The
still
whole
fall
point,
through.
the whole point, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, make it so that it's fitted so that it's sort of a click and then it goes down so it can't free fall, because then you get into the other problem. You know, you don't want to be creating it, but it also has to be fit for purpose. It's got to be easy to use, otherwise people will bypass it. And as soon as you get, you know, that human element in there, and I'm not saying that technicians are you know, bad people or whatever. It's just human nature, and particularly if you're tired, particularly if you're on tour or anything like that, then you know you're going to be bypassing.
offset mid-rail, so you still have the mid-rail there.
Yeah.
And you still have the ability to get your light coming over and position, so I think kind of good top rail, trick rail and offset.
That could work, yeah. And as long as, I mean, at least the lights are a decent size now. You know, back in the day when you were having those 2K profiles with the back end that big, you know, it's impossible to do anything with that. Yeah, cool. Is there any other questions around this? I'm sorry to make you all sad. It's just sort of throwing the gauntlet out there, really, for the industry. You know, it just, a hard hat will not save you in those situations.
With your 3 metres, in conversation game we had a few weeks ago, when you're in your EWP above 3 metres, is schools of thought there is whether or not you should be fitted or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got, you know, EWPs have got a kick rail and they've got a centre rail, and I guess you look at whether you can fall out, you know, and you know, that would be my argument with that. Certainly, if it's a knuckle boom, you definitely want to be in.
My argument too is if you're using it properly, you should not fall out.
Yeah. And I'd say the same if you're in a place that's got a catwalk and it's got all of those things, then you don't need to necessarily be harnessed in because you've got the thing. And it's like, well, you know, what sort of idiot would fall out? But you know, it's flu season, for instance, and you know.
If you're not harnessed in and it starts to tip and fall, you're supposed to be harnessed in to stay with it. Believe it or not, that's what they're saying.
No, scissor lifts don't have an anchor point for a harness.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate around that. Personally,
I was going to say scissor lifts don't need it, unless you're like outside different situation.
knuckle boom you definitely do. And I've seen a great bit of footage of some guys being catapulted out. Have you seen that? What was that, on Dodgy Riggers or something? It's like, whoa, that's why you do it. Yeah, they're like little puppets. It's horrendous. Yeah. Note to self: don't drive it on the rough terrain that makes it tip. I mean, cool. So we come to time. Is there any other questions? You can come and sort of snaffle me later. I mean, I'm only going to reiterate that. As I say, I don't necessarily have the answers to all of this, but I do challenge you to always look at those top levels and see if there isn't something that you could do, and not just go for the bottom.
Can I just ask a question just about, I'm working on a thing at the moment with lone workers.
Yes.
And I just wanted to know, it seems quite expensive to buy a device for staff when they're working on their own.
Yep.
Is there a common device used in New Zealand?
Not that I know of, because it's not something I've had to deal with, and my computer's just gone flat. But there is, what I would recommend is that you do look up remote workers on the regulations and see what they say that you should do. And I believe it's something like you must have a process whereby they can be communicated with or something like that. And then you come up with your own way of managing that. And whether that's, you know, you give everyone, you know, a sort of harness thing that fits their phone into or whatever, you know, that's up to you. ready to manage. But make sure that you look at what the regulations say about it first. It's funny because I've always looked at that and gone, remote workers are people who work in the bush, you know, and all of that. But we actually often are remote workers in venues. Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, apparently. Cool. Thank you very much.
Alrighty.